It's Friday, so that means it's time for a Triple M Footy News Update with Tom Browne. My name's Rudy. I've got Tommy here in the studio. We're going to chat all the big news, including Ned Guy stepping down at the Pies, some GWS player stuff, Horses' lonesome coach's box tomorrow night against Melbourne at the MCG, and of course, also who it's going to be a big weekend for. And you won't be surprised it's a bit Collingwood flavoured, that one as well. Tommy, how are you?
Good afternoon, Rudy. Can't wait to discuss all that and more. It's a big weekend of football. Seriously, big word. We're going to start with the Pies this morning.
Yes, indeed we are. Tell me what's happened with Ned Guy.
Well, Ned Guy officially quit as the Collingwood list manager yesterday. I understand that Ned wanted to basically step aside even after last trade period. I think he was a bit cooked from restructuring the salary cap and also cooked from, I guess, all the controversy surrounding the trade period. He's got a pretty good management business, I think, in the background. I wouldn't be surprised if he went back to that. And I think he sort of offered this to Collingwood some time ago. And I think it was a tight group of people that knew about it for some time, including Graham Wright, of course, the new football manager, also Mark Anderson and Nick Maxwell. And I think it was brought forward on Thursday, I should say. Word was getting around by journalists, I think, including me, that basically knew what was on.
Mm-hmm.
And it came out yesterday. So it is a big story.
Very, very big story. So, is there anything else to discuss about it?
There's going to be a lot of discussion, Rudy, about his legacy and what led to this, and obviously the context at Collingwood. The context is this disastrous trade period, and list managers are sort of the new coaches. They've sort of become semi-famous, guys like Adrian Dodoro, and a lot of clubs now move on the list manager prior or at the same time as moving on a coach because it's one way of diffusing some tension. And I think there'll be debate about Ned Guy's role at Collingwood, and I think to assess that properly, you'd have to know more about some of the decisions and whether Ned was in charge and had autonomy in that role or whether there were lots of cooks in the kitchen. Jeff Walsh, the football manager, whether Nathan Buckley was involved, whether Eddie Maguire was involved in some of these key decisions, like the Brodie Grundy contract, like the Adam Treloar deciding to trade him. Who decided to move Treloar on? We still don't really know the answer in terms of the internals at Collingwood. And but it all sort of relates back really to the Dane Beams thing. I mean, 2 first-round draft picks and still paying Beams money, I think, to this day. I'm told these days it's not a huge impost on the salary cap, but it clearly was last year. And a lot of their problems relate back to the Beams trade and deal. And I think to assess Ned, you'd have to have good optics on how much autonomy he had in that role and how much he was responsible for those decisions. But I think history might reflect on him kindly because their most recent draft was good. And I think he spent a lot of time cleaning up the salary cap. But I think he was a fall guy very much. Where to now for Collingwood? Well, the messaging around that trade period was disastrous. I think most of the communications team at Collingwood are still in place. So you'd have to think they'd be looking at them at some point in time. Mark Anderson, the CEO. Derek Hine is still there. He was responsible or involved in a lot of the key recruiting decisions. He's still a recruiter. And I'm not sure how involved he is with the current football program. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he... I'd be surprised if he's there long term. Put it that way, Derek Hine. And they've got this game against North this weekend, Rudy, which is massive because I felt there's been a push, certainly in the media, for Nathan Buckley to continue this week and get re-signed for a couple of years. It sort of has been a bit of a media-driven push that I wouldn't be surprised if it's coming from his management. Bucks might deserve that, but that any suggestion, I think, of Bucks getting a new deal will be put to one side if they get beaten by North tomorrow. Again, I thought they beat the Suns last week, but I think they'll beat the Kangaroos. But there's a lot of pressure on Jordan De Goey, but in particular, Nathan Buckley and his coaching future this weekend.
Yeah, I also said last week they were guaranteed to win against Gold Coast, so I'm not going to make any predictions, but I do think that moving Darcy Moore down back is the correct course of action.
Well, he's the best centre-half back in the competition, and like I said, I think last week, the 60th or 70th or 80th best forward. 4 touches, couldn't find the ball, so I would have thought that was a logical move.
Yes, I'd have thought so as well. Let's move on from the Pies briefly. Tommy, GWS, what are you thinking there?
Yeah, some news from GWS. This week they've re-signed Toby Green until the end of 2026. I think that's to smooth out Green's contract. I think he had a front-ended contract a back-ended contract where it was like 250 or 300, then a lot of money at the back end in these latter years. And by extending him, well, A, he's playing good football. Who wouldn't want to extend him? But B, it helps them smooth out the salary cap. What does that tell you, Rudy? It tells me that the Giants might have to move a player at the end of the year. They've got Kelly on around $1 million, if not more. Green on around $1 million, if not more. Cornelio on around $1 million, if not more. And Whitfield. That's seriously heavy. And I think Kelly is a key one now. I've heard there's 3 or 4 clubs, including North Melbourne this week now, officially interested in Kelly. The ball's in Kelly's court. He's got a contract with the Giants for 8 more years worth $1 million a year. And I'd be surprised if a club would pay that. North possibly would pay that. But they're inquiring on the basis that at the moment he's playing a high half forward sort of wing type role. And Kelly wants to play in the midfield. And clubs are saying, well, if we were interested in him, perhaps we'd give him time in the midfield. So that might be a bit of a fillip or an incentive for them to get him. But I wouldn't be surprised if one of those Giants falls out at the end of the year.
He has a connection to North as well, doesn't he?
His dad played there, and I think he supported them, and it's always been discussed. So there's definitely a connection to North, no doubt, Rudy. Whether they pay the $1 million, though, I mean, that's...
Well, yeah, it's hard to say, isn't it? But watch this space on that one, definitely, as they are every year. There's always a watch on GWS having players leave. Speaking of...
Sydney?
Sorry, speaking of speaking of the teams from Sydney... John Longmire is going to be sat by himself in the coach's box tomorrow night against Melbourne at the MCG.
That'd be a strange feeling, wouldn't it? The whole dynamics of the box would be out. I've just spoken to the AFL about this. They're assisting Sydney, trying to get the assistants involved virtually. So the AFL want the assistants to be involved. They obviously can't come here because they just went to a coffee shop where hundreds or if not thousands of people had been to. Not their fault. But the AFL is trying to get a virtual setup where they can contribute to the coaching tomorrow night virtually. How would that work, Rudy? Would you split the groups up at quarter time, the mids, the defence, and the forwards, and get a plasma screen happening with some video conferencing? I bet you could use Zoom.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're going to have to. They're going to have to. I'll tell you what, if
they'll need mobiles.
They're undefeated against Melbourne at the MCG in their last 7, and if they manage to continue that streak tomorrow night, it's going to be a huge win in the club's history.
I reckon John Longmire will have phones going, he'll have Zoom going, FaceTime going. There'll be the works. It'll be quite interesting. It will be a very interesting scene inside the Sydney box tomorrow night.
Yes, big watch on that. We've got to get out of here shortly because I can see Rosie wants the studio. But before we do, big weekend ahead for I've picked out three people and clubs. Big weekend ahead for Nathan Buckley, obviously.
Massive.
As we've stated off the top. I feel it's a big weekend for Geelong. Bad loss last week against Sydney. They've been very much unable to bring down Richmond in the last few years. There was one game where the Tigers were very undermanned. And obviously...
Dusty's back tonight.
Obviously, the grand final. Geelong need to show that they can beat Richmond at footy, really, don't they?
It's hard. We saw Richmond basically embarrass the Bulldogs in the third quarter last week, which would have left Luke Beveridge scratching his head. Yeah,
it was very, very familiar to me as a Geelong fan, that sort of them ruthlessly hauling in a 4-goal lead and then running over the top of them. And I reckon St Kilda, just quietly, it's a big weekend for them. They're away to Gold Coast, and they're actually underdogs.
They should beat them. They've found some form, and they're better than they've been playing, and they showed it last week. So hopefully they show it again this weekend for Saints fans. I'm still a fan of their list and where they're going.
Yeah, me too. Huge fan of where they're going overall, and I think that I'm hopeful that they'll get the win as well. As I said, we've got to go, Tommy. Thanks heaps for this.
Thanks, Rudy.
I'll see you Monday morning, and we'll wrap up all the action from round 8, all the big news stories. I'll see you then.
Can't wait.
The Footy's on Triple M.